This is N7MSB. Today we're doing a training that was prepared originally by Bob, KB7WPS. I forgot his last name again. But anyway, his slides, he prepared the slides and pretty much most of the presentation. So we'll start on slide 1. Many of you may recognize the image on slide 1 as downtown Rexburg in 1976 in the wake of the Teton Dam breach and the resulting flood. In years past, we have conducted training on just about everything that has to do with preparing for and responding to an emergency situation. But tonight we're going to discuss something that no one really talks about. Slide 2, please. This one is also of the Teton flood. We have been diligent in assembling our communication equipment, keeping our skills up to date, and in constant readiness. We have our family communications plans and have strived to encourage and mentor ward and stakes plans. We have our 72-hour kits and our long-term storage of food and other necessities. But now, how would we feel if it all violently washed away? Disasters strike suddenly, even when we can see them coming. In their wake, they often leave serious injury, illness, and even death. Homes are lost. Often jobs, businesses, and even careers are lost. Sometimes family members are lost. The fact of the matter is, our state of mind can be negatively impacted by a simple snub or insult. Try to imagine what would happen to our emotional stability if we were suddenly engulfed by a violent emergency. Our friend Todd Smith, N7TMS, experienced a significant upheaval from a natural disaster that struck his home a few years ago. Now he has kindly consented to share with us how this experience impacted the emotional well-being of his family and himself. Are you on frequency, Todd?
I am here, Marylin. Thank you. This is N7TMS. Just be forewarned that even though this event happened 11 years ago, it still tends to bring emotions close to the surface when I relate the events of the day. So I apologize in advance for any emotion that might come through. It was Tuesday, July 15th, 2014. It was raining when I left work a little after 5. We ate dinner and watched out the dining room window as the rain fell. And then the hail started. It was light at first, but then rapidly got much heavier. The gutters were clogged with hailstones, and rainwater was running off the roof anywhere it could. The drainage ditch behind our house had a lot of water running in it, runoff from the farms that were above us to the south. It was the first time we'd seen that much water in the ditch. Now, I could tell by the way the water was running off the roof that it was probably getting into the window wells, too. So my 13-year-old daughter, Erin, and I went to the basement to see if water was getting into the house down there. We were standing in the bedroom on the south side of the basement when a wave of water poured into the window well. We later learned that the ditch had exceeded its capacity and a river of water was running through all the backyards right into the south side of our home. In less than a second, the 4-foot window well had filled with water, and I turned to my daughter and I said, "We've got to get out of here." And I grabbed her hand, and we turned toward the door just as the window broke and water rushed into the bedroom. The force of the water had picked up the gravel in the bottom of the window well and tossed it through the window. So as we ran out, I pulled the bedroom door closed behind me, but there was a pull-up bar on the header that prevented the door from closing all the way. So we ran across the basement to Erin's bedroom. Fortunately, she'd been packing to travel to my sister-in-law's house the next day, so many of her clothes were already on the bed. I grabbed the corners of her bedspread with the intent to, haul the whole load upstairs. But at that moment, there was this loud crashing sound, almost like an explosion. And I turned around and looked back across the basement to the bedroom we'd just run from, and realized that the force of the water coming through the window had blown the bedroom door clean off its hinges. Within seconds, the water had risen to my waist. So we made our way We made our way with a bundle of clothes against the current to the stairs and finally out of the icy water. Our home was put back together in about 6 months, but my family was and still is deeply affected by the event, especially my daughter. A few years later, while we were living in that house after the storm, every time it rained, we would all get very stressed and anxious. We lived in fear that any rainstorm would bring another flood. And even a few years later, on the 8th floor of a Kansas City hotel room, my daughter was physically shaking as we watched a strong thunderstorm roll through that area. So although the feelings of fear, anxiety, and hopelessness are not nearly as prevalent today as they were on July 15th, those emotions still run deep and still periodically surface when triggered, like tonight. Sorry. This is N7TMS. Back to you, Marylin.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate the sacrifice this was for you. This is N7MSB. Slide 3, please. Dr. Mary Lystad of the Center for Mental Health Studies of Emergencies in the National Institute of Mental Health described 2 phases of emotional reaction to 6 typical to disasters, the initial response and the delayed response. She stated that there are 6 typical initial responses: fear, numbness and shock, confusion and difficulty making decisions, desire for information, seeking help for oneself and family, and helpfulness to others. Slide 4, please. Delayed responses, which can surface months later and apparently even years later, include changes in appetite, headaches, inability to sleep, anger, suspicion, apathy, depression, withdrawal from family and friends, disillusionment with official help, and guilt at not having been able to prevent or avoid the emergency. Slide 5, please. A personal story from Bob. Quote, about 5 years after the 2005 devastation of Hurricane Katrina, I attended a business conference in New Orleans, Louisiana. On the taxi ride to the hotel, the young driver asked us if we were from the area. When we explained that we were from Pacific Northwest, he began telling us about his experiences during the hurricane. His voice exposed deep emotional feelings. He turned off the meter and asked us if we would like to see for ourselves. He took us to different neighborhoods, some destroyed, some recovering. He showed us the water line on an abandoned building that reached 30 feet above the taxi. For all that he showed us, though, I most remember the intensity of his voice and how close to the surface his emotions were. I believe that to this day he is still grieving. Slide 6, please. Extreme stress, goodness, my reading is terrible today. Extreme stress is common in the aftermath of a storm, but when it persists for months, it can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. People with PTSD may experience flashbacks to the disaster, panic attacks, an extreme startle reflex, persistent avoidance of things that remind them of the disaster, and anxiety and depression. PTSD can also interfere with a person's ability to control emotions, leading to angry outbursts or crying spells. A common outcome of PTSD is substance abuse. Sometimes these issues arise as a result of persons' attempts to control the environment after the disaster takes away control. Slide 7, please. As reported on goodtherapy.org, author Zon Zolinas, I hope I said that right, noted that storm survivors aren't the only people who suffer when natural disaster hits. People who are on the scene at the time of the event or who witness the immediate aftermath, including first responders such as police officers, firefighters, and I might also add emergency communicators, and the media, can also experience psychological symptoms. They could be haunted by people they were unable to save, by images of injured people, or by the massive nature of the destruction. Some witnesses may even feel guilt that someone else's home or life was destroyed, but theirs wasn't. The symptoms for witnesses and responders are often the same, including PTSD, depression, and other mental health conditions. People who are present in the aftermath of a disaster may need as much help and support as the victims. This discussion may appear somewhat negative, but in fact, the emotional impacts of disaster have been a natural fact of life ever since the world began. We cannot avoid or resolve the matter by pretending it doesn't exist or pretending it only happens to others. Another personal story from Bob. I am reminded of young friends and family members who enlisted in military service during the Vietnam War. They wanted to be part of the great adventure. Now, most of them are seriously disabled, dead, or dying, my brother-in-law included, not because of the war they fought in, but because of the war they brought home with them. The same happened to a partner I had when I was a federal police officer. During a firefight, he killed a suspect in a drug smuggling case. He became permanently emotionally disabled and finally committed suicide. Prior to this, none of us gave much thought to what happened to us in this situation. The world still needs soldiers and first responders and emergency communicators. So what are we to do? Slide 8, please. The first step is to recognize that trauma can and will affect us emotionally when we are exposed to it. No one is excused from it. We can bluster and strut and declare our immunity, but that will only make the problem worse down the road. We need to identify and recognize the symptoms not only in ourselves but in others as well. It will be hard to provide help to someone who may be in crisis if we don't recognize their symptoms. Slide 9, please. In addition to all of the preparedness steps that we take for our physical survival, there are steps we should take for our emotional well-being. The first thing would be to identify that we can control what we can control and what we cannot control. Fires, floods, earthquakes, and other disasters take no pity on their victims. The things we spend our lifetime building and accumulating can be gone in an instant. There is little we can do about it, so what can we control? William O'Callaghan, Assistant Director of Emergency Services of the American Red Cross in California, observed that the pain of loss can be particularly profound when friends or neighbors are lost or social support is unavailable, or when a home is destroyed. Losing a home is like losing a limb. You may have worked on that house for 20 years. You may still be paying off a mortgage. You may never have the opportunity to own another home, especially if you're older. And later on, moving into a new home, it's not the same as an old home. Lesser losses can be devastating too. The items that cause the most grief are photographs. People lose their history when photos are lost. If we analyze the life we have created for ourselves, we can prioritize the value of every individual item in it. What must I save? What are the items that I could lose, whether willingly or not, and still survive emotionally? Important papers can be copied and preserved. Photos can be saved electronically, so even if the originals were lost, the images would not be. These are just a couple of the interventions that can be made to mitigate our sense of loss that we will inevitably feel in a disaster. Slide 10, please. Bob tells another story. I was living in Washington State when Mount St. Helens erupted, dropping 540 million tons of ash on ours and many nearby states. I saw the sky go black and was dusted with fine, flour-like ash, but I was on the very northern edge of the plume and we experienced very few effects from it. About 3 months later, I drove 70 miles into the debris field to visit a healthcare professional friend of mine. I had hardly arrived when, like the New Orleans taxi driver, he took me around to see the aftermath of being buried in more than 6 inches of ash. He cried as he talked about the darkness when the plume blocked out the sun for many hours and the isolation, since no one could go anywhere. He talked about the empty stores and predators who sold 10-cent masks for $20. He wasn't an unstable person. He just needed someone to talk to. Slide 11, please. Foster relationships on which you can lean for support. Start with your family. Have a good family communications plan. Develop strong family relations. Speaking of predators, 3 or 4 weeks before Bob wrote this training, FEMA sponsored a teleconference regarding human trafficking during a disaster. Everyone in the family needs trusted friends. Relying solely on family members for support may increase our sense of isolation. Slide 12, please. This is November 7, Mike Sierra Bravo. The subject we have been discussing tonight is infinitely larger than the few moments we have to discuss it. The critical message, though, is that we cannot waltz into traumatic environments and not be affected by it. We need to be vigilant to identify symptoms of stress in ourselves and those we serve. We need to prioritize and prepare our lives so we can focus on that which matters most and therefore overcome the loss of the insignificant. And we need to develop support systems to strengthen us through crisis. And of course, we need to seek help when it is needed. If we will do these things, they will help us to develop the emotional resilience that we will need to fulfill and magnify our callings and responsibilities. Slide 13, please. We cannot conclude our discussion without acknowledging the power of our faith in God. Through the plan of salvation, we know that everything in this mortal life is temporary and perishable. The plan came from way above our pay scale, so we can't change it. Nor would we want to stop it if we truly understood the plan. We also understand that God loves us and is mindful of us, and through the power of atonement of Jesus Christ, we have available to us the healing and enabling power of his mercy. And that constitutes the most important support network we can find, and which we must never fail to nurture. On another couple of tools that have come out since Bob wrote this, not fully come out. Some of them were still in effect, but they've changed a little bit. There's the ERC program, which is called the Addiction Recovery Program, and it is focused on learning how to fully benefit from the healing available from the atonement. And this program is run for both the addicted and the family members as well. While these crises that we've been talking about are not necessarily due to addictions, the process of healing for victims and responders is pretty much the same process in many ways as that of the addicted and their families. I personally would recommend getting a copy of that manual, as well as the Manual for Emotional Resilience class, which was the last one that came out in the Self-Reliance series. These manuals are just more tools we can put in our toolbox to help us when we're healing and coping with the trauma and crises are needed. And both of those books are available in the online resources that we have in the church. Slide 14, please. We only have a few minutes left, but if you have any questions or comments, please know with your call sign. Good. So with that, I will conclude the training for this evening, and thank you for joining us. And this is N7MSB, turning it back to KB7WPS, Net Control. Thank you.
Thank you, Marylin. Probably the reason there's no questions tonight is that kind of a personal thing for a lot of people dealing with crisis over their lives. And I can't comment enough about the importance of dealing with situations and being with your friends and your family and whatnot to work through things the best you can. And we know there's going to be issues popping up, so we might just as well put this tool in our toolbox and carry it along with us.